Hello, good evening. You're watching Times Now. I'm Shreya Upadhyay. On Times Now, viewers, we continue to get you the latest developments in the West Asian region. Remember, the escalation in West Asia has now reached Iran's strategic oil and gas infrastructure, marking a dangerous new phase in this war. Israeli warplanes have struck the Shehran oil depot in western Tehran, which is a major fuel storage hub. Iran's oil ministry has claimed that the fire is under control, but videos emerging out of the country show flames raging at the site. This is a strategic shift. Israel is now targeting Iran's energy infrastructure, a move that could disrupt supplies and send global markets into further turmoil. Now, let's tell you why the Shehran oil depot is significant. The Shehran oil depot is one of Tehran's key fuel storage and distribution hubs. It supplies petroleum products to critical civilian and military sectors in and around the capital. The depot sits near major highways and industrial zones, making it a strategic asset for urban fuel logistics. Hitting Shehran is a tactical move to disrupt Iran's domestic energy stability and signal vulnerability even in the country's core urban centers. Targeting such a facility, remember, escalates this war from nuclear and military sites to economic warfare, aimed at undercutting Iran's ability to sustain prolonged operations. Also, take a look at this report filed by AP correspondent John Gambir, who explains the situation on ground.
Launched a series of retaliatory missile strikes on Israel in the last 24 hours. This is after Israel has launched just a devastating attack on Iran that has seen much of its senior military leadership killed. Now, these strikes that happened in Israel focused primarily around the area of Tel Aviv. There was destruction in private homes and other areas, and in Israel, they say at least 3 people are dead and dozens of others suffered injuries. Now, in Iran, at least 78 people have been killed in these Israeli strikes so far. That's according to casualty information offered by the Iranians, who also say hundreds of others were wounded. We do know that top leaders in their military, including the head of the Revolutionary Guard and the Army Chief of Staff, among others, are dead. As this is going on, even today, the Israelis have been able to basically own the skies over Iran. They've been striking targets across the country.
Now, Israel's Operation Rising Lion has involved over 200 warplanes, striking more than 150 targets, including nuclear sites, military bases, and energy facilities. Iran's retaliation is codenamed as True Promise 3. It has seen over 150 missiles and 100 drone strikes in Tel Aviv, Jerusalem, Haifa, and other cities. Iran has reported that at least 78 people have been killed, including senior commanders and nuclear scientists, with over 320 wounded. Israel, on the other hand, has reported 7 to 9 civilian casualties and over 200 injured people. Iran has called Israel's strikes a declaration of war and has threatened to expand targets to include American bases in the region. Israel, on the other hand, says its strikes have set back Iran's nuclear program by years. In fact, Prime Minister Netanyahu has warned that Israeli warplanes will soon be over Tehran once again. The Israeli Defense Forces, meanwhile, claim aerial superiority, striking Iranian military and energy sites at will. Now, as the confrontation gets intense, who has the edge? Well, tactically, Israel holds superiority with deep strikes into Iran. But Iran's massive missile volume has shown that it can reach and damage Israeli cities. Iran also has built indigenous nuclear and other arms, and so it doesn't rely heavily on foreign supplies. Meanwhile, world leaders have been calling for restraint. Presidents Donald Trump and Vladimir Putin held a 50-minute phone call urging both sides to de-escalate. The French President Emmanuel Macron, German Chancellor Friedrich Merz, as well as the UN have all called for an end to the escalation. The UK, meanwhile, has deployed RAF Typhoons in response to Iranian threats against British bases. American President Donald Trump, in his latest statement, said, and I quote, "The US has nothing to do with the attack on Iran. If we are attacked in any way, shape, or form by Iran, the full strength and might of the American armed forces will come down on you at levels never seen before. However, we can easily get a deal done between Iran and Israel and end this bloody conflict." This is what Trump has said. Meanwhile, Indian Prime Minister Narendra Modi, in an earlier call with the Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu, has called for restoration of peace and stability. India is closely monitoring this entire situation with energy security at the forefront. Oil prices have surged nearly 9%, putting pressure on the Indian rupee and raising inflation fears. Experts warn this could spill into maritime routes like the Strait of Hormuz and further disrupt global supplies. West Asia, ladies and gentlemen, stands at a dangerous crossroad as cities burn, oil depots explode, and the world holds its breath. Let me quickly introduce my guests who are joining us on Times Now. Adam Scott Bellows, CEO, Israel Innovation Fund, is joining us, as well as Captain Alok Bansal, Director, India Foundation. Shortly, we're also expecting Buzin Wagmar, Center for Iranian Studies at the University of London, also to join us on the broadcast. Good evening and namaskar to both of you gentlemen. Adam, let me begin with you. There have been, of course, fresh strikes on part of Israel on Iranian military as well as nuclear facilities. Now we're also seeing the energy infrastructure being struck by Israeli strikes. An overall view, if you had to give, what is it that Israel is trying to achieve? What would it be?
First of all, thank you for having me again. You know I always love coming on and speaking to your viewers from Israel. It's a very good question. I think the ultimate goal is regime change and a destabilization of the current regime, both militarily and economically. As the news has shown, many of the leaders of Iran's military and government have had their families leave the country. We've seen images of Iranians underground stuck in tunnels, dancing in the streets, celebrating the preemptive attack by Israel. So I think it's very clear regime change is the #1 goal. You also saw a statement from the former Shah's family calling the regime completely incompetent and for the people to rise up. And, this entire operation is called Rising Lion. It refers to the Bibas children, but also the people who are being occupied by the Islamic Republic, the Persian people.
All right, we have Buzin also with us on the broadcast now. Buzin, welcome. We're talking about how perhaps Israel's primary and a larger objective is regime change in Iran. And you and I have earlier spoken about how, the Iranian economy has been crippled by several sanctions that have been slapped against it over a period of long time. There's also a segment of Iranians who are unhappy with the regime of the supreme leader. Do you therefore think this is an opportune moment for Iranians to revolt or resist against the current regime?
I couldn't agree more with Adam from Israel. This is the moment. And may I just back up a bit? What has been derided so far as Prime Minister Netanyahu's alarmist brinksmanship has been finally vindicated, that Iran is besieged and broke in more ways than one since the revolution of '79. And as these strikes are being undertaken by Israel, I cannot asseverate enough that Israel has picked up the slack and doing the dirty work for the Arab Muslim world, all of who can breathe a sigh of relief as Iran's nuclear infrastructure is being dismantled. This is a death cult regime that has held the entire region in thrall since 1979 with extremism and terrorism that has become a way of life. And all of them, the entire GCC, not to mention also the Arab world at large, the non-GCC world, which has felt Iran has been a threat to it existentially speaking. You can remove Israel from the discussion for a moment. And of course, the Jewish state has been the target of the Iran regime and a raison d'etre for its elimination since 1979. But even for argument's sake, remove Israel from the equation, Iran would still be a threat to everyone in the region, has indeed been.
But Buzin, can I then understand from you what is the other option for Iranians if not this regime?
Well, Iran's had two revolutions in 1905 and 1979, and one hopes this time they could finally have a representative government in a truest sense, which would lead to an inclusive, moderate polity, and that would be at peace with its near abroad, the entire Middle East as such, and the Muslim world as such, with whom Iran has been at odds. Iran's drone missile have not just been fired into Israel, they were fired into next door Pakistan last January, for instance, or into Iraq. So everyone has a foretaste in the region of how Iran has been a destabilizing influence. You can remove the anti-Western rhetoric, remove US and Israel out of the factor, and there are still one-to-many issues with Iran's presence, and not Iranians per se, or Iran as a legal conceptual entity. It is this regime, the Islamic Republic, which has squandered billions since '79 on running proxies, when it could have actually, despite possessing 18% of the world's hydrocarbon reserves, turned a new leaf and had a prosperous, booming society and economy. But obviously the regime's priorities have been different, not least running Holocaust denial competitions and trying to target and eliminate the Jewish state, to which it has been avowedly committed.
Okay. Captain Alok Bansal, the fact that the West Asian region has not seen stability for a long period of time, and perhaps it's one of the tragedies of the region that there are several external powers at play who take West Asia as their battlefield, as their playground, to have their own political and diplomatic games being played. In terms of the role that America has played or would play in the near future, how do you see that moving forward? Because Donald Trump is clear that militarily, right now, he doesn't want to directly get involved.
See, I think this whole region is now in a big mess. Firstly, while I have no problems with the Israeli attacking Iranian nuclear establishment, but they have really not been able to achieve the objective which they had set out to. Because as of now, whatever reports we are getting from IAEA is that none of the enrichment facilities have been damaged to such an extent that the process of enrichment has actually stopped or something like that. There are, of course, certain critical facilities which have been eliminated. Certain nuclear scientists have been killed. Iran's top establishment has been killed. As far as regime change is concerned, it's a very laudable objective. But my experience and analysis of Iran tells me that whenever there is a conflict, in fact, those opposing the regime invariably rallies around the flag. Actually, it was during Iran-Iraq war, then Muttahida Khalq, which was actually a very powerful force, actually completely lost out and became delegitimized because they supported the Iraqis. So, to my mind, eliminating or changing the regime, then prolonged war does not really help it, because prolonged war actually brings people rallying behind the flag. Now, as far as US is concerned, US has actually been making vague statements. Initially, they said they are not aware. Then Trump said he's aware. And now Trump is in a bit of a dilemma because he got elected saying no war. But there is a huge chunk of his supporters who probably would want him, because while Israel has the technical edge and a decisive edge, and we have seen the way they have targeted targets in Iran. But we need to understand that Iran is a much bigger country, and if they can't wind up this conflict in a short time, we have seen that they have not been able to wind up Gaza after so much of time, then Iran is a different kettle of fish. So if
Let me get in Adam on this, Captain Bansal. Adam, you want to respond to this? The fact that, what Captain Bansal is saying, accompanied with the fact that, do you think it's going to be much of a deterrent, Operation Rising Lion? Because clearly Iran is not listening to the United States of America or any other agency such as the IAEA.
I definitely think this will be a decisive blow to Iranian infrastructure, the Iranian nuclear program, and possibly even help disintegrate the current regime. We're just at the beginning of this current stage of the war. And let's remember, we have not been in the middle of the Israel-Gaza or Israel-Hezbollah war since October 7th. Like I said, on October 8th on this program, this is the beginning of the Israel-Iran war. So this is really not a preemptive strike. We have waited until the final moments that we possibly could. If anything, we will see the inclusion of Saudi Arabia into what is going on. We will probably also see the inclusion of Jordan into what is going on. Also, Donald Trump did recently state that if necessary, they will come in and help destroy the rest of the nuclear facilities. I do see this moment as Benjamin Netanyahu finally doing what he has said that he would do since almost the beginning of this century, which is make sure that the Islamic Republic does not have a nuclear weapon. And when an existential threat like that arises to the Jewish state, the Israelis do take it seriously. One of the reasons why this conflict has been dragged on is because of the way Israel fights wars. If you look at where Iran has fired their rockets versus the very calculated places where Israel has been attacking, there's a huge disproportionate I guess you could say grouping, whereas you can see the Israeli bombardment is being grouped into very specific military and economic areas, whereas right behind me, less than a kilometer away, rockets have landed. I think there is a huge difference to this versus what has been going on in Gaza, giving the concentrated high civilian areas versus a much larger country like the gentleman just said. But at the same time, I do not foresee it. Look at the way we were able to cripple Hezbollah in such a short period of time, which everybody thought would ignite World War III. I think what's going on right now is very similar to what happened in the first 2 weeks of Israel completely crippling the infrastructure that Hezbollah once had. I don't think
But,
it's
Adam, let
incorrect
me
to
take
say,
this across to Burzine. Burzine, one of the points that experts say works in favor of Iran is the fact that they've been able to indigenously build their nuclear arms and weapons and technology, and therefore they're not reliant on foreign, allies or foreign partners, which is not perhaps the case with Israel. Do you therefore think this will have an impact? Yes, there will be a short-term impact on their nuclear facilities, on this being a deterrent. But in terms of long-term deterrence, do you think Iran will stop it?
No. And prior to what began on 13th June, Israeli strikes, Shreya, look at what has happened. The IAEA declared on 31st May, Iran, for the first time in 20 years, as formally reneging on its NPT obligations. Point number one. Point number two, Director General Grossi was insulted by Tehran when they actually told him, and I quote, "Mind your business," when he asked, what is this sudden spike that we just reported in the 31st May report of 400 kilograms plus of U-235 enrichment that has taken place to the tune of 60%. That is enough to build 10 nuclear warheads if it were to take it to its logical conclusion. And that would make the Islamic Republic the only non-nuclear state, an NPT signatory, which would possess such nuclear warheads. Plus the fact that in defiance to Director General Grossi, they started work on further enrichment and expansion at the Fordo facility. 3 new facilities, including Varamin and Turkozabad, have also gone critical. And the Iranian scientists in question at Natanz mentioned that we are upgrading the 1st generation to 6th generation centrifuges. So Iran has pretty much asked for it. It cannot be made out to be a regime that has done anything that has been in compliance with these rules. And finally, Shreya, this has to be pointed out. Iran is pretty much a paper tiger. If I was an Iranian official, I would wonder how abysmal is my intelligence that they couldn't do anything to gather all of these IRGC and other generals, including Chief of Staff Bagheri, in one location, and they were warned not to meet, yet they foolishly met and now have met their fate. At every turn, Israel has done its homework, and now whatever has been prophesied has come true, because it just goes to show that the regime is inept and simply cannot control itself. And Israeli penetration of the closest circles right up to the Supreme Leader's office must make him too very afraid, because the targets that have taken place in North Tehran, the bombing has taken place in the prosperous neighborhoods. That goes to show where most of these IRGC officials live, in sharp contrast to the poverty of the rest of the city.
Pertinent points, Burzine, that you make. But Captain Alok Bansal, this entire conflict is not just between Israel and Iran. Its ripple effect will be felt with the entire world because of the kind of global oil supply chains that work out from Iran. Case in point is the Strait of Hormuz, and that might be impacted due to this war. Oil prices went surging. There's obviously concern in India as far as the rupee and oil prices are concerned. What is your take? How do you see this now moving forward? And here in India, what can we do to make sure that we are least impacted by this entire war?
See, firstly, I think the attack on oil facilities is certainly a different level of escalation. And Iran is a major supplier as far as the global oil market is concerned, a global producer. But what is the bigger danger is the threat of closure of Strait of Hormuz. And irrespective of what anybody might say about Iran being a paper tiger, Iran definitely has the wherewithal to close Strait of Hormuz, which can remain closed for months, if not longer. That ability does exist. Though, of course, it would be extremely dangerous for Iran itself because it will choke its own trade as well to a very great extent and its own economy also to a very, very great extent. But if they come to that sort of a suicidal decision to close the Strait of Hormuz, it will be catastrophic for global economy. And India, which is actually largely dependent on imported oil, and in fact, at this point of time, Saudi Arabia, Iraq, are major oil suppliers to India, apart from UAE and other countries. We have a major trade relationship with UAE. Yeah. All this gets affected in case Strait of Hormuz gets closed. Also, the bigger problem is that any turbulence in the Persian Gulf would force Indian diaspora, which is largely employed in Persian Gulf and is a very, very major source of remittances to India, scurrying back to India. We have seen that happen during the Gulf Wars, and that would again create a problem for Indian economy.
Adam, a lot of critics of Prime Minister Netanyahu say that, look, domestically he's facing problems. 3 days back, he and his government survived an attempt to dissolve the parliament. This was an attempt by the opposition parties. He's fighting wars along the battlefield. Now Iran has struck civilian areas as well, where casualties among civilian population are happening. And therefore, what does it achieve? Why are you putting the country at stake?
I think it's very clear that there was a significant amount of political theater leading up to this attack. And I think that not only the theater that was created between the Americans and the Israelis to misdirect everybody that there was some daylight in the relationship now, but also with what was going domestically in Israel in terms of what was happening within the parties of his own coalition, not necessarily the parties in the opposition. I think it's very clear that this was a very calculated event. It did occur on day 61 of the 60-day deadline that Donald Trump did give the Iranian regime to come to some type of diplomatic accord or show that there was some type of positive movement and trust being made. I think it's very important to note that as soon as people want to think that Prime Minister Netanyahu is down for the count, he always seems to be able to get back up and for boxing's sake, throw a knockout punch to whoever his enemies are. I mean, earlier in the war, when Gaza seemed to be dragging, there were major events that showed major progress. The same thing with Hezbollah. Right before that, Hezbollah was basically crippled in under a month, which we thought was going to ignite World War III. It's very clear that the planning and the execution, while many critics wish he would have maybe done this earlier, there is a clear pattern with Netanyahu that he not only waits till the last minute, but somewhat in a way to show and allow diplomacy to take hold based on the partners that he has around the world and giving everybody up to the last minute to provide some type of diplomatic solution, which has never actually succeeded in his tenure. And I wouldn't say that's because of his rhetoric or movement by Israel by any means. This is clearly something that the Israeli government and every successive prime minister for the last century, for this century, has said, if Iran comes close enough to a nuclear weapon, Israel will attack and cripple its nuclear capabilities. Iran had multiple attempts to convert their nuclear program into a purely civilian program. They did not want to do that. And if you look at just the comments most recently by MBS, he very clearly stated that he felt that the Iranian regime and the Shiite eschatological apocalyptic regime, which is, can really be reduced to Shiite Islamist nationalism, their goal is to spread, and that they are the National Socialists of the Middle East, and that they pose a threat to every single neighboring country around them. So I do think that the critics are quite silent right now here in Israel, and that Prime Minister Netanyahu has once again shown that you should not bet against him.
Okay.
And that...
Okay. We'll leave it here. I have paucity of time. Thanks very much to all of you gentlemen. Adam, Burzine. Burzine, apologies. I have paucity of time.
Owned with Oman too, and not just Iran, which would lose Muscat as an ally in the region. The only one it so far has.
Okay. We'll leave it there. Thanks very much to all of you, Adam, Burzine and Captain Bansal, for joining us this evening on Times Now and sharing your perspective.